her return. "Be careful what you wish for, my dear." Aurora was not altogether surprised to see that they were back in the throne room of the Thorn Castle. She blinked her eyes muzzily and was transfixed for just a moment by how out of place her little party looked, she in armour and golden rags, the three strange ladies dressed in red, blue, and green, the prince who looked somehow more alive and glowing than any of the murky people around the edges of the room. A blinding green light shone from the orb at the top of Maleficent's staff. It bathed the room in a sickly cast and confused the shadows. Her visage, never that healthy looking to begin with, was also a throbbing green, but the queen's purple and black robes lay thickly and luxuriously around her as always, and she sat with less of the tense elegance she always had. Now she seemed more relaxed, almost sated. A raven perched next to her wrist on the throne, and seemed to smile evilly. The princess was confused. Maleficent had never kept a pet. The visual similarities between the two were not subtle. Both familiar and mistress were black, yellow, angular, and vicious-looking. The princess turned away from the pulsing green light and blinked again to take a better look at the rest of the room. The people pressed against its walls were those she had spent the last subjective decades with, the people whose real bodies were elsewhere, sleeping. They seemed strangely unfamiliar now, like someone was forcing her to name people in a portrait who were hard to distinguish and resembled others she might have known. Maleficent's unnatural servants stood guard in front of them. There were more of the nasty goblin-like creatures with yellow eyes than Aurora remembered. They stood insolently with their spear tips crossed to make an improvised fence to hold their prisoners back. Obviously the queen had given up all pretense. The poor nobles and servants and peasants now all knew what she was saving them for. "Sorry, what?" Prince Philip asked, disoriented. Maleficent looked annoyed. "What? What did you just say? I missed it." "I said be careful what you wish for," the evil fairy hissed through her teeth. "You were just wishing to arrive here faster. I arranged that for you." Yes, we get it. Very clever," Aurora said a little impatiently. That was one nice thing about all this. She realized that the guilt she felt for her irritation with Maleficent's more annoying habits was irrelevant now. She could be honestly irked by the woman's penchant for the dramatic. She looked deep into the woman's face, trying to recall everything she had felt for her and why. How she had wanted nothing more than respect, friendship, and love from her. But there was not a lot that was human in that face, she now realized, or even normal fairy. She saw the queen through two different sets of eyes, and her new vision was rapidly overtaking the old. This was an unapologetically evil, power-mad, and furious creature in front of her. What would a real queen do in Aurora's place? "Please step down from my throne," Queen Aurora Rose said coldly, "and release me from this curse." Maleficent was genuinely taken aback for a moment, her yellow eyes flaring in surprise. Then she threw back her head and laughed. The raven cackled in unison with her. Her other evil servants gibbered and hooted as soon as they felt it was all right to do so. "And what, O benevolent Princess Aurora? You'll deign to spare my life?" "No, but I shall grant you a dignified and quick death." She felt, rather than saw, the change in stance of those around her. She would bet that the prince was smiling grimly. Maleficent cocked her head and gave a knowing look. She stroked the raven for effect. "Well, my. A few short days in the world outside the castle, and suddenly you've become a cold-blooded killer." "I haven't become anything of the sort. In my authority as Queen of the Realm, I'm executing a known criminal, assassin, and enemy to the state." "Why not throw me in a prison, and have me rot there forever?" Maleficent said philosophically. The young woman raised an eyebrow at the fairy. "Apparently killing you once isn't enough to get rid of you," she said dryly. "I hardly think prison bars, dream prison bars, would hold you." "Oh, you flatter me," Maleficent said, looking down and touching her chest coyly. But her grin was all evil and hellfire. She hissed, "Of course you also flatter yourself, if you think you can get within a metre of this throne without my obliterating you on the spot." She ducked her head like the dragon she had briefly been, prepared to strike. Prince Philip flinched. When the evil fairy hunched over, Lyanna was revealed standing behind the throne, her black eyes unreadable, her face impassive. "Greetings, Lady Lyanna," Aurora said coldly, nodding towards the girl. "I'm delighted to see things worked out so well for you." "Oh," Maleficent said, putting on a moue of surprise and concern. Did you think she was replacing you? As my ward?" Her face twisted into a sneer. "She's nothing, don't you know that? Just a little bit of my essence and a lot of clever magic, with some help from the powers below." At this, Leona's eyes hardened. She didn't move. Aurora's had a comeback ready, but it died on her tongue. All her queenliness shifted for a moment, slipped aside as a twice-orphaned girl broke through. "Did you feel nothing at all from me?" she whispered. Maleficent looked shocked at the question. The room was silent. Everyone else also seemed surprised by this turn of the conversation. "All of those years," Aurora said, pressing her, advancing slowly on the throne. "All those talks we had, all those meals we shared, all the things we did together. Did you really feel nothing for me?" Maleficent gripped the top of her staff tightly. Her fingers over the orb caused the hideous light in the room to dim. Every human shuddered in relief. "You were my means to an end," she finally said. "You're not answering my question," Aurora made herself say. It was hard but felt good. Never in either life had she ever questioned someone in authority before. "Whatever feelings I may initially have had in the rearing of a human child, in the end were irrelevant," Maleficent said. "Through your death, I would live again. After being murdered so callously by your prince." "Murdered? You were trying to kill him, because he was trying to save me. Are you that deluded, Maleficent? All of this, came about because of the curse you put on me as a baby," she yelled. "A baby, because you weren't invited to a party. Your parents had no respect for me and the powers that I wield. You cursed a baby because you were slighted." Prince Philip moved quietly up to be next to her, hand on his sword. Maleficent shrugged one elegant shoulder. "And? Do not slight those of great power. I believe that's a lesson to be learned there." Aurora suddenly felt the urge to draw a weary and exasperated hand over her face. She was losing this verbal battle. She was losing her own train of thought. There was nothing to reach in Maleficent. The princess had been raised in a dream world by a mad woman. She had been looking for a mother in a monster. The three fairies and Prince Philip moved in close around her, sensing a change. They fenced Maleficent together. "What made you so horrible, Maleficent?" the Blue One demanded. "What made you into this monster of a fairy?" "Was it something in your childhood?" the Green One asked. "Is that why not being invited to a party irked you so much?" "Who cares?" the Red One said, brandishing her sword. "She's evil now. Let's get her." "What if I had some little power?" Aurora interrupted. "What if I had some ability in me like yours? Would you have kept me close and taught me well, schooled me in the arts of magic?" Maleficent was speechless for a moment upon the realization that Aurora had overheard that conversation with her parents. "But you have no powers," she finally said, "so it is irrelevant." The two women looked each other in the eye. Then a dagger flew through the air and buried itself in the throne next to Maleficent's head. The evil fairy's eyes widened in shock. "But what if I did?" Aurora whispered fiercely. "Doesn't count," Maleficent said slowly. "This world isn't real." The princess almost threw her hands up in frustration. "What about all the special tutors you assigned to me? What about all those things you did that seemed a whole lot like caring?" "It was just a game," Maleficent said lightly, "to keep me amused in this dreadfully boring place." But she couldn't look the princess in the eye. She faltered under Aurora's stare and turned to pet her raven to get away from it. She would never ever reveal the truth, even if there was some last lingering thread of humanity about her. "You have no idea," Aurora said with a mix of relief and disappointment, "how close I actually was to being able to forgive you. Killing you is going to be so much easier now." Maleficent recovered herself quickly. "Easier? Killing me? I think you speak too soon, mighty queen." "I am less than a meter from you," Aurora whispered into the fairy's face, "and I'm not obliterated." There was utter silence in the castle as all watched the evil fairy with the horns and the princess with the silver helm glare at each other, their noses no more than a centimetre apart. Maleficent's jaw worked twice before fury overcame her. She thrashed her staff arm impatiently. Vines, thick, rubbery, and strong, but sickly-looking, twined up the princess's legs and torso. Suddenly she was being pulled backwards, sliding across the throne room. "Rose!" Philip cried, trying to grab her. When she was about 5 meters away, the vines hardened into woody trunks that glued her to the floor and pinned her arms to her sides. Maleficent rose, her cape and robes billowing behind her, caught up in the eddies of magic she was beginning to summon. At once the green fairy was flying between the two of them. It was a little shocking. The three women hadn't shown any fairy-like abilities up to that point, and seeing a full-grown middle-aged lady go buzzing overhead, albeit one who seemed to get slightly smaller as she went, was slightly unnerving. "Be reasonable, Maleficent," the Green Fairy said, sounding like a disappointed mother making a last effort with an unruly child before punishing her. "This is Aurora's world. You can't hope to win. You're in her mind." "Oh, I have no fear in that," Maleficent said calmly, and Raven cackled once. "The little girl can barely figure out her own feelings, much less what she wants or how the world works. Now out of my way, you useless firefly." She pointed her staff and a flash of purple lightning crackled out. The Green Fairy dipped and just barely avoided it. The bolt hit a stone in the ceiling above her, which exploded, leaving a sooty black mark where it had been. The Green Fairy gave Maleficent a chastising look. "People change. People grow, Maleficent. Normal people." The Queen ignored her and kept letting the lightning bolts fly. Despite the Green Fairy's size and billowing dress, she managed to deftly avoid most of them. The throne room lit up with purple flashes, and she buzzed around them as they illuminated her features. In fact, very much like a firefly. One bolt veered off and shot over one of the prisoners. He ducked, but it still managed to set his hat on ugly purple fire. The poor man threw it to the ground and stomped on it, despite the warning growls from the guards. "Can we do this somewhere else?" the Green Fairy demanded worryingly. "There are a lot of innocent bystanders who will die in the real world if they're hit in this one." Aurora wondered if the Green Fairy knew how incredibly stupid she was being. Maleficent did what anyone who knew Maleficent at all would expect. She grinned a toothy lips pulled back, skull-like grin, and pointed with her staff. A purple crack of lightning exploded from it and roared its way across the room, and then ended its path in the heart of a man. Aurora was all painting to her. He groaned once and then crumpled. The smell of burning human flesh filled the air. Aurora swore in rage and struggled against the vines. At least they didn't cut into her skin, protected as she was by her breastplate and gauntlets. Then she remembered she didn't need to be anywhere to do what she needed to do. She tried not to close her eyes and calmed her inner self. "Not yet," the Blue Fairy whispered to Aurora as it rose. "Let us do the initial battle. Wear her down. Keep your attacks as a surprise at the end." "But more people will die." "Everybody will die if Maleficent wins," the Blue One shot back. "Try to think tactically." "Murderer!" the Green Fairy howled and dived for the Queen. Maleficent aimed around her, picking out another person in the crowd. The Green Fairy banked to the side to intercept the bolt. She held out her hand. Suddenly there was a wand in it. A crackle of golden energy flashed out and knocked the purple magic aside. Gold and purple sparks rained on the room as they cancelled each other out. As if she was choosing flowers, Maleficent calmly aimed her staff at different people in the room and then fired. The Green Fairy dived and twisted, shot high and rolled, parrying each bolt with a bolt of her own. Maleficent twirled her staff and bit her lip, but didn't seem that concerned. It was more like she was playing a difficult game than trying to kill people. Her attacks came faster. The dream prisoners cowered and ducked. Gold and purple light made terrible shadows behind them, multiplying the prisoners by 1,000 shadow prisoners. Maleficent's evil servants laughed and only occasionally tried to avoid the bolts. One got hit. He exploded on the spot, fangs and tusks in yellow eyes and trottles disintegrating immediately and becoming black soot. There was nothing red, nothing animal, nothing real or alive about the death. His compatriots, standing on either side, hooted and laughed at his fate, at their luck, and then Maleficent suddenly turned and aimed her staff directly at the Green Fairy. With a toothy snarl she sent a giant bolt arcing across the room. The Green Fairy dived, but she was too slow, too late, too concerned with saving other people's lives to worry about her own. Her legs and arms flailed as the energy hit her directly in the heart. Purple rays erupted from her eyes. There was a huge, brilliant explosion. Aurora turned away, unable to look. When the light faded, a small dim ball hung uselessly in the air where the fairy had been. It dipped and bobbed a little, unintelligent and barely animate. "Begone, little firefly!" Maleficent laughed. The Red Fairy let out a strangled cry of rage. She ran forward, sword drawn, making straight for Maleficent's heart. Maleficent dipped her staff experimentally at the woman. The Red Fairy deflected the purple bolt easily, parrying it away as if it were nothing more than a fly. Maleficent fired again. The Red Fairy deflected the lightning again. Maleficent frowned and sent out a spray of bolts, dozens of them, one after the other. All that resulted in was the Red Fairy slowing her advance to defend herself from the attacks. She didn't stop. Her arms moved quickly, her muscles flexed beautifully as she contorted herself into different positions to avoid being hit. Her brow furrowed with the effort, but her eyes remained clear, full of concentration and anger, and not a hint of fear. She managed to inch her way forwards a little at a time. Prince Philip, still beside the mostly frozen Aurora, rose, tensed his own muscles, and reached, unthinking, for his sword. "Not yet," the Blue Fairy whispered. "Your lives are short and precious." Save the wasting of them to the end if we have failed. Philip nodded, and didn't take his eyes from the fight. Lyanna also watched the fight unblinkingly. The sparks from the magic and flashes from the Red Fairy's enchanted sword glittered in her eyes. With everyone watching the incredible battle in front of the throne, it was unsurprising that no one noticed two of Maleficent's servants creeping up on either side of the Red Fairy until it was too late. "Look out!" Aurora shouted. "On your left!" Philip cried. The Red Fairy didn't turn around, but instead thrust his sword back, up under her armpit, surprising the creature behind her. Her blade sank deep into its chest, but she didn't waste a moment watching him gurgle and bubble and sputter and die. She spun and dived, slicing the second creature's feet out from underneath him. "Doesn't have a leg to stand on," the Blue Fairy quipped, unable to help herself. Maleficent swung her staff and the purple bolt grazed the Red Fairy's left calf. She staggered and fell to her knees. No cry escaped her lips. She sucked in her breath and shook with pain, but she still forced herself to rise. Maleficent muttered something unintelligible and aimed again. This time, instead of large purple bolts, little sickly green fireballs shot from her staff. These flickered strangely and were connected to each other by syrupy strands of magic. The Red Fairy looked confused for a moment, but she beat each away easily, one, another, a dozen. But once they hit something, the balls didn't dissipate the way the purple bolts had. They drifted to the floor, the sickly green strands that followed behind them taking much longer to fall, slowly arcing to the ground like cold honey. The more she hit the balls away from herself, the more the strands built up around her. They stuck to her clothing, her feet, her arms and legs, everything except her sword. Before long, the Red Fairy was completely entangled. Big gobs of the glowing green stuff stripped from her arms, dragging them down. They pulled her sword arm closer to the floor, even though she still tried to parry the attacks. Soon she couldn't move at all. Maleficent smiled widely with satisfaction. Then, as gently as if she were a dewdrop fairy anointing a flower, she tipped her staff lightly at her opponent. A giant purple flash erupted, engulfing the Red Fairy and her bonds, and everything else within a few meters. Aurora screamed and turned her head. Philip put his arm around her but didn't look away. A weak red ember glowed amid the scorched, foul-smelling residue of the evil magic that burned the floor. Maleficent tossed her head back and laughed. Likewise her raven cackled. She put her free hand out to scratch its throat. "Well," she asked, "you are all going to die eventually. Who wants to be next?" "And when we're all gone, then what?" Aurora growled. "You prance self-importantly around an empty castle." "You think ruling a bunch of pathetic humans is my ultimate goal?" Maleficent asked with patent surprise. "I really don't care a whit about you festering house-apes or your ridiculous kingdoms." "No, you only care about the parties they throw and whom they invite," the princess said archly. Prince Philip grinned. "Nice one," the Blue Fairy said, drifting forwards. She turned once in the air, giving Aurora a mock military salute. The fairy had little doubt about the outcome of her assault, but she didn't approach Maleficent directly. Instead, she drifted towards the edge of the room, to a far corner, and hovered just over some prisoners and their guards. "All right, Maleficent," she said. "Do well, at least try to remain consistent. If you don't care about humans at all, you shouldn't care about killing them, so leave them alone." Maleficent, still stung from Aurora's jab, set her chin and leaned back, putting her concentration into a bolt of immense size. The Blue Fairy delicately bounced out the way. The bolt shook the floor between two of the guards, enveloping them both in purple fire until they burned away to nothing. "I repeat my question from earlier, Maleficent," the Blue Fairy said almost casually. She floated to the other side of the room like she didn't have a plan beyond keeping as much distance between her and the Queen as possible. "What happened to you? You weren't always this insane. A bit touchy, perhaps, and malicious, but not hell-bent on evil." "It is not evil to want to live, to continue my life that was cut off so prematurely," Maleficent snarled, hurling another bolt at her. The Blue Fairy ducked, revealing the guard she stood in front of. He received a full blast and exploded in surprise. Aurora began to smile, seeing what she was doing. "She's trying to even the odds for us," Philip whispered excitedly. "I know, shut up!" "And I can tell you from personal experience," the Blue Fairy continued, slowly drifting down the line of prisoners and guards as if she was inspecting them, "that royal parties are really not as much fun as you would imagine. I like humans more than you, don't get me wrong, but they're shockingly smug, especially their kings and queens." With inarticulate rage, Maleficent hurled bolt after bolt at her. The Blue Fairy dipped her head and bowed, and twisted out the way, moving as little as possible to avoid all the attacks aimed at her. Almost every missed bolt hit another guard, sending it back to hell or wherever they came from. And golden dish domes, really, who needs them? Got at least a dozen from various birthdays and christenings over the centuries. You just sort of clutter up the place. Trust me, you didn't miss much at that party. 4 more bolts, 4 more guards. The 5th bolt singed the black of the blue fairy's dress, but she didn't even wince. She just continued her maddening little flight. "I deserve more respect than that," Maleficent hissed. "Yes, you keep saying that. Have you ever thought that maybe they were afraid you'd make a rather unpleasant party guest?" I mean, I can't imagine why they would think that, but this time she couldn't help letting out a yelp as an extra-large, furious purple bolt shot from Maleficent's staff. She dived out the way, holding her head. But the blue fairy was not as agile or quick as the red one. The magic caught her full in the side. Purple flames crawled over the left half of her body, singeing her flesh as she struggled to keep going. "So touchy," she croaked through scorched black lips. She limped, half flying, half walking towards Maleficent. "Die already, you annoying gnat!" Maleficent swore. The blue fairy suddenly lunged, diving at Maleficent instead of moving away from her. When the killing bolt got her, it was too close to the evil fairy for her to entirely escape its burning aftermaths. Maleficent shrieked as flames licked up her face, leaving charred tracks on her cheeks. The blue fairy gave a wink to Aurora and Philip with a swollen eye, then vanished into the fire. Only another weak little will-o'-the-wisp remained, blue, hovering over her ashes. The evil queen wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked surprised by the blood she saw there. If she appeared merely unhealthy before, now she was positively frightening, bloody and burned and still pulsing a ghastly green. She managed to cackle hoarsely. "No matter. I will be whole in a matter of minutes now. Guards, bring me a victim." There was a pause. "Guards!" she ordered again. There were only a couple of the inhuman things left, and they looked unsure of themselves now, shaken and unmoving. With most of their cohorts wiped out, they were no longer gibbering and hooting at death. "Don't you dare," Aurora said. "You've killed your last innocent." "Oh no, I haven't," Maleficent hissed, striding forwards with her staff. "It's your turn now, sweetest. And there's no one left to save you."